Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Christina Buckingham and I'm going to be introducing our first session. It's about user experience, a selection of talks looking at how data can be used to support, inform and measure the user experience. Q&A will take place at the end of the session, so please post your questions in the chat on the right. Please use the Q&A prefix and we will get to them once all three presenters have concluded. Our first speaker is Ellie King, an AHRC doctoral researcher at the Oxford University Museum of Natural History, who will talk about the museum exhibition user experience. Ellie?
Hi, yes, I'm just getting my screen share working. Sorry about this. We'll go from here. So, there we go. Thank you very much for having me. So just to mention, my name is Ellie and I'm a PhD student at the University of Warwick and the Oxford University Museum of Natural History, and I look at exhibition evaluation and development and essentially collecting meaningful evaluation data. So my presentation is a real overview of my work and specifically the evaluation methods that I've developed from user experience kind of sector. And I'll be talking through the method, what analysis that can be done with it and the benefits of using such a method. It will be a very quick overview and it can be quite complicated at times. So if you are interested in what I've said, do feel free to contact me and I'm happy to explain it in more details. This is a bit of a whistle-stop tour, essentially. So this is just the kind of theoretical underpinnings of the evaluation model, which is based off a Hassan-Zars model of user experience, which is about how users interact with products. And all my work is about bringing this to the museum sector. And I'm not going to go into this now, but essentially the key point is that there's no guarantee that what the museum presents will be interpreted by visitors exactly as the museum wishes, due to various different audience factors, their motivations for visiting, their prior knowledge, experiences, all of those different things. But using this evaluation methods, it's all about being based on understanding visitors and bringing those two perspectives closer together so that there is a higher chance of what the museum wants to put out is received by visitors in that correct and successful way. So taking this into a visitor survey, the survey is a simple double-sided A4 survey, which takes around 3 to 5 minutes to complete. So it's a very quick survey for visitors. We collect some visitor details, as you can see there, and then visitors view an exhibition or an exhibit, whichever kind of thing you want to evaluate. And then they select an emotion that they've felt most strongly from a standard set of emotions from the Geneva Emotion Wheel. They then fill in this box on the right with 25 word pair scales, which are essentially assessing a variety of qualities of an exhibition. And there's a sense of a positive quality and a more negative quality. There's a 7-point scale, which means that a visitor, if they feel strongly towards one of the words, they tick on a more outside box. If they feel a bit more indifferent about it, they'll tick towards the middle. Then there's 8 outcome statements, which are about understanding, learning, engagement, enjoyment, interest in returning. And they're just rated on a simple 5-point Likert scale. Then about 10% of visitors complete an interview, which is simply a comment box on the bottom of the form and a quick chat with me just about the particular features that they felt influenced the way that they rated the scales and how what kind of stood out to them in the exhibition. So that's the survey that goes on. And then there's a whole load of benefits of this method, which is produces quite a lot of data from quite a small survey. And I've kind of listed all of the statistical analysis that you can kind of carry out, but I'm going to go into it in more detail in a minute. But essentially, it's all about understanding the key perceptions of the exhibition according to the visitors and the mechanisms behind the outcomes that they said. So why do visitors find it good? Why do they find it engaging? Why did they find it enjoyable? And what are the qualities of the exhibitions that is influencing those outcomes? So that's essentially what the data set and the statistical analysis can do. So I'm going to go into a little example, and this is from our current exhibition at the museum. And the exhibition is about meat consumption and its effect on the environment. And it's a really, really good exhibition. So if you haven't seen it, do please come and see it. But essentially, so evaluation was conducted over about 5-6 days in June 2021. So over the summer, collecting 242 surveys and 22 interviews. So you kind of see the rate of data collection and the resource that goes into collecting this data. So the first thing I'm going to talk about are the word pair scales. So here is a simple graph of the means and standard deviations of all those scales. So these are actually kind of written slightly the wrong way around. So all of the so the word on the right, so for instance, clear, that is related to a point number 7, and a confusing would be related to point number 1. So using this, you can kind of see what those key perceptions and key qualities of the exhibition is. And so here we're picking out kind of it being interesting, it being relevant, it being accessible to people, but then slightly less so on the kind of enriching, enticing, stimulating qualities, which are more about the kind of experience of the visitor. I think what's really interesting about this method is that even though you get kind of visitor bias, visitor positive bias in filling out surveys, so you can see that all of these means are above that middle point of 4, you can still see those various differences and still get that nuance. So even though there is that kind of positive bias from visitors, there you are getting quite an accurate representation and a nuanced and detailed representation. I also find it can be quite accurate. So for instance, if we look to the flat and dynamic, rigid and flexible, which are the kind of lowest points, this exhibition is in a long and smaller corridor, and due to COVID at the time, it was specifically designed to be as open as possible, so everything was flat against the walls and things. And this shows that visitors have kind of picked up on that. They're feeling it feels a bit flat and it feels a bit rigid because there's not much movement going on. And so that kind of points towards this being a bit of an accurate method in terms of picking up those perceptions of what visitors what the museum kind of intended with what they put out. The same is with the kind of outcome scales, and you get here, obviously this is on a 5-point scale, so the median is 3, the 3 mark, and obviously everything's higher. But we can see that there's those few nuances in terms of understanding being a lot higher, well, a bit higher than enjoyment. And that's an interesting, because of this topic, it can be quite a difficult topic, quite difficult to feel. A lot of negative emotions were associated with it. So that sense of enjoyment is maybe to be expected not to be so high. So that's just kind of picking out those perceptions from very simple kind of mean calculations. And then we get to the kind of cross tabulations, which is essentially understanding those results through the different visitor demographics and motivations for visiting and those emotions that we collected at the start of the survey. So this is a statistical test which tests to see if there's a statistical difference between 2 or more groups. So is there a difference that's going on beyond a sense of chance? And I'm not going to go through all the results here, because they in the kind of full reports that I do, they are very detailed and go through what is affecting each particular significant result. But I'll just pick a few out of here. So with gender, you can see that women rated the exhibit a lot favourably more highly than males. And then interestingly, and I think this is a really interesting point, kind of the emotion ones at the bottom. So visitors who said they felt guilty were statistically more likely to say they wanted to change their behaviour as a result of visiting the exhibit. And I think that's a really, really good kind of result from the exhibition that gives a real nuanced and detailed sense of visitor behaviour. There's then the sense of kind of correlation analysis. And this is where you really start to understand the mechanisms of visitor experience and what is influencing visitors with their outcomes, with their enjoyment. So here's a kind of ranking for each outcome, and it's the top 3 word pairs and the top 3 outcomes for each statement. I've only included a few of them here, but we can kind of see that in terms of the word pair of bad and good, which is a sense of kind of judgment, visitors are highly correlating that with it being stimulating, it being inspiring, and it being impactful. So they're all kind of the emotional, experiential terms and qualities of the exhibition. So we kind of see what matters to visitors in that. But then you go to understanding, and that correlates most with the exhibition being clear, it being intuitive to follow, and it being relevant. So you can see those different priorities for different types of outcomes. And I think that the most interesting one for me is the one at the bottom, I want to do something differently as a result of visiting. And the three word pairs that associate with that are impactful, empowering, and inspiring. And you can kind of see how all those types of motivation and action come together. There's also a thing called factor analysis that I do that I'm not going to talk about now because this is a very quick presentation, but that's essentially boiling down all those word pairs into different groups. And that again shows that kind of mechanisms of the visitor experience and how they're interacting with the exhibition. And then kind of going on from all those qualities and the points brought out in the interviews, we can kind of hang the exhibition on that initial framework just to provide a kind of really neat summary of what's going on. So what are the key exhibition features that have been picked out? So for instance, in this one, people really were drawn to the facts and all the science that was presented. They then felt it was a relevant and topical issue, but was could be quite negative. There was some affecting in terms of what their diet was, their strong interests, prior interests, and it being a really relevant topic, and then to what the outcomes were. And then I think the real positive of this method is that you can use it on any exhibit or exhibition. So we during this evaluation, it was done on 3 different exhibitions, and they were all totally different. But you can see here that we can have those clear comparisons, again, using that cross-tabulation method to see what those distinctive differences are and whether they are different. And that's really useful for kind of picking out how different types of exhibits are working and whether we can draw benefits from ones into the others. So just to kind of conclude, and this is a very whistle-stop thought, but the benefits of this method, as I kind of see it, is that it provides a very detailed data set from a simple 2-page survey. So a lot of the reports I write are kind of 30, 40 pages long, and it provides detailed statistical analysis in how visitors perceive that exhibition, as well as providing that understanding of mechanisms of the visitor experience. And then what you can kind of do is relate those key exhibition features, so what text, content, specimens we're using, with the qualities of the exhibition and then the visitor outcomes. So essentially what that can be is we can plug in at one end from what the museum intends to do to then produce a particular quality and then produce an outcome. So we can understand what the direct actions of the museum are to influence that visitor experience. And just as a final point, that isn't necessarily about success, but about what the museum intended. So if we're intending it to be flat, and like we talked about earlier, if we're intending to be flat and rigid and open because of the pandemic, is that coming across and is that being successfully communicated? So that's me. I'm sure I've probably ran over, so I will stop sharing. But they're my details if you ever want to talk to me, and do drop messages and comments in the chat. Thank you.
You did really well, Ellie. Thank you very, very much for this insightful presentation. So next up is Gwendoline Knybuhler, Product Manager of Smartify, and Elena Arvanitopoulos, Smartify's Head of Design. They will be presenting Understanding Smartify User Archetypes. Gwendoline, Ellen, stage is yours.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm just sharing.
Thank you, Helen.
Can you see that?
Yes. All right. So before we jump into it, just for a little bit of context about Smartify, it's a museum app, the most downloaded museum app. We're working with over 300 partner venues around the world. And being driven by museum partner requests, we did not always have the time to fully consider the impact on end user experience. So it's one of the challenges many museum apps that you might have used in the past are also facing. They're trying to do too many things. So now we're taking a step back. We're looking at how we actually integrate our features better. And because we're just not an agency building features for museums, but we have to consider the end users, we're having a close look at these analytics. Ellen is going to share how we have used these to drive our archetypes and to inform product design. This is what we'll share with you today. Helen, when you're ready to jump in.
Sure. Thanks, Gwen. So yeah, just to recap what we'll be sharing today, a few information about data informing product design, around our archetypes, opportunities and challenges, and some personalized experiences. So how do we use data with informing product design? So we need to understand what is it exactly that we're wanting to measure. And for us, for the type of product that we are, we needed to look at it at a very wide and holistic view. So in my experiences, the best way to see this is to understand our user journeys. So user journeys is the flow on the bottom left with the colored post-it notes, to really look at a quite broad way of how customers are engaging with our application and our product. So how are they entering? How are they engaging? How are they exiting? Where are they entering and exiting? And what exactly are they doing? How are they feeling? And what might they be saying and thinking as they're going through that process? In the bottom right, we're talking about user flows, and they go into a little bit more detail into what exactly are the features and the interactions, so the components that people may be using within our product. So from this, what we end up doing is, how do our audiences engage with the product from these customer flows and customer journeys? So we look at this by our analytics. We have a great team that really dives deeper into our analytical data. So those user flows that you saw earlier is what we can do is we can start documenting on what we want to measure and track and see how our numbers and results are coming back, so we can better understand what we can improve in our features, what it is that we need to better improve for the outcomes for the users. And so, that's just typically using a lot of analytical data. And on our right, which is a features overview, this is really going into the depths of our product and understanding what features exactly and what components, what little elements of the product are people engaging with, and why would they be more interested in one thing over the other? What can we be doing better? So that analytical data is going to give us those numbers, but at the same time, we also do need to speak to people and not just get a quantitative insight, but do keep in mind this is just as important as qualitative. So this takes me to the next slide, where we take that qualitative data and we try to group it into archetypes for our digital products. What we've done as an organization is we've been able to see various types of archetypes. As I mentioned, we looked at various different types of people from their flows and their journeys. And what we did is I'm sure a lot of people here may be aware, and I'm sure you guys do it, is interviewing, testing, speaking. There was obviously COVID, as we know. We didn't have as much of an opportunity to go into museums just freely and speak with people. So we looked at other avenues where, now the experience is quite different, from an online to offline, on-site to online as well. So just really taking those factors into consideration. And we were able to produce 5 archetypes, which range from sociable people to people who just want to escape the everyday, explorers that are really looking for those new exhibitions, passionists who obviously still may be working in the industry and want specialized content, to a day tripper, which is the typical museum lover that just loves to come and check out the latest exhibition. So what we did was we took, as I mentioned, all that quantitative data from the analytics and everything that we understood from our features. And then we started testing and speaking with people. So wanting to know about arts and cultural sector, wanting to know about music, how are they engaging with the venues? And then also cross-checking that as well with some of our partners and making sure we really collaborate with, not just our users, but our partners in giving them that feedback, in them understanding what it is that we all can do, say better, just how we can improve that experience. So that's to the left, where we've been able to speak with partners and users and bringing all those quantitative and qualitative data points. Now, this is just a fragment of the research and the insights that we've captured. But I mean, similar to what Ellie was saying before, there's just so much information that you're able to capture. We just use a lot of this information to make sure we're sharing this consistently across the organization and across different parts of the business, so they're aware. And then what we try to do is we've developed, if anyone's heard of it, a jobs to be done framework and user requirements framework, which is really just going through those archetypes that we created, make sure that we understand the outcomes and the outputs that they're wanting to achieve. What is it that they want Tinto to by the end of them interacting with our product, and maybe afterwards, and then making sure we really go into the user requirements that they are needing. So given that holistic, overarching user experience that our users want, and we can deliver to our partners. So back over to you, Gwen, for some opportunities and challenges.
Thank you. So we're very lucky because we're working with so many partners. That gives us access to so many data. And with 2 million users, there's quite some behaviors that we can discover. But some of our partners are heritage sites in the countryside with a loyal returning audience that knows them and their collection by heart and are always eager to discover new stories. Some of our partners belong to the most visited museums in the world, with visitors that mostly come once for 2 hours as their one museum visit in a few days trip in a big city. These behaviors are radically different, and taking the time to identify the personas and then create their data thumbprint. I've just shared here 2 little numbers we are using in a very big group to create these personas and their data thumbprint. This allows us to cluster the audiences. So even if we have rare cases in a big pool of millions of visitors, identifying these loyal visitors from the day trippers allows us to offer to each of them an experience that we hope satisfying, because it will be bespoke. This opens a whole lot of opportunities. The main one, and my favorite one, is that we can create synergies between collections. Having a shared audience means we can recommend one exhibition to someone who went to similar venues or similar exhibitions and maybe have never heard of this place before. For that, we are combining several approaches to data collection and analysis. If you can change the slide, Helen. Thank you. So the first layer of data we're using is user interactions. We're using a visitor's favorites, the previous scans, the tours they listened to. We're comparing this data set to other users who have very similar data sets. So if user A interacted with scans saved the same 10 objects as user B, plus some others, then we're going to recommend these other objects to user B. The pitfall here is that using this approach as a standalone will just replicate the power ranking of some content over some others. And I'm sure many of us will be talking about that today and tomorrow. So we know that that in itself is not enough. So we're using a second layer, which is collection metadata. We're using logical links created by the metadata of the museum collections themselves. If you've liked Manet, we can recommend you Monet because both are tagged as impressionists. Tagging collection items, tagging artists, but also tours, trails, and all the different types of content we have at Smartify is the foundation work to creating a bespoke visitor and user experience. So our work has been to combine and unify the metadata of our different partners, because we all have different terminologies, and create one standard that gives enough room for each venue to exist individually. We're using art movement and style, we're using culture, we're using religion, periods, demographics of the artist or the maker, etc. But not every collection has this type of metadata. Many do, not all do, or not all have it for their entire collection. So we're adding a third layer, which is computer vision labeling, color analysis, pattern detection. So computer, we use interactions and collection metadata, and then we add this third layer, which allows us to create tags on collections that don't have any. It creates a great amount of extra data for our partners' collections. Some are very funny. We've had, for instance, active pens or English pleasures being tagged to some collection objects, and allowed us to discover a few things. But now, if you've liked art, where we've detected horses, for instance, we can show you more art where we've detected horses. If you've liked artworks with multiple shades of blue, we can show you more blue. But then the pitfall here is that I'm sure you must have watched 3 rom-coms in a row on a streaming platform, and now all that's recommended to you is romantic movies. And you're not in that mood anymore, and you want to see action movies because you're over the breakup. And it's the same with our personas. In Paris, I visit museums most weekends. I'm definitely a passionist, but drop me in Rome or in Athens, and I become a day tripper. So we're adding 2 extra layers to these 3 that I showed you. If you want to switch slide, Helen, we're using art history to create link between, for instance, Impressionism and the Edo period in Japan. And we're also using our users. We've imagined a feature that gives a voice to them directly. And this is what you can see on the screen here. Depending on whether they are on-site or off-site, we'll show them only the venue's content or much more, and then broaden the horizons. So as a conclusion, because I don't want to run over time, we've learned in that process that digital products should not be built on the assumption that users are people visiting museums. We had to look holistically at the entire user journey, understand how various archetypes interact, what they're looking for, from offsite to onsite to offsite to onsite again, and create a complete experience. So for instance, we're using tickets to share the links to the Progressive web app and to QR codes for the fastest onboarding possible, so users can access the audio guide of the Dürer exhibition at the National Gallery as fast as possible. But then when they visit, they save artworks, they create their accounts, they download the app, and then they go through the gift shop, and then they go home, and then at home, they look at the content again. And here, for instance, we've created an exit through the virtual gift shop experience where they can also exit the visit virtually. It's a constant cycle of deep diving into the numbers, testing, learning with users, testing with partners, and starting again. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Gwendoline. Ellen, great presentation. Thank you so much. We will be answering questions at the end of the session, so please do post them in the chat. So our next speaker is Christina Buckingham, PhD candidate at the University of Salford, collaborating with the Science and Industry Museum. Christina will present the Playful Power Hole, Digital Interpretation and Steam Engine Science. Christina?
Thank you. Thanks and welcome everyone. I'll just share my screen. Thank you. Okay, hopefully you can see that all okay. So yeah, I'm Christina. I'm a multidisciplinary designer and developer, and I'm coming to the end of my 2nd year of a practice-based collaborative doctoral award with the University of Salford and the Science and Industry Museum. So this presentation is about digital interpretation and steam engine science. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the Power Hole and the project brief. I'll describe some of the prototyping solutions that I've been exploring and experimenting with. I'll talk about the way we've been user testing these prototypes and collecting data about them, and the next steps in the work. So as you can see, this is the Power Hole. It's at the Science and Industry Museum, and it houses a huge collection of working steam engines. It's currently in a major restoration and redevelopment phase, with the big idea of the future exhibition being the human-engine relationship. And I've been investigating methods of building this concept into family-friendly interpretation through a playful mixed media approach. I've been concentrating particularly on a compound of 5 small working steam engines. And through our interpretation exploration, we want to explore how we can firstly provide a starting point for less confident visitors, giving them a springboard for further inquiry. We want to break down engine science into 5 key parts, showing families and visitors what they all have in common. We want to empower families to engage and make them feel welcome. And finally, we want to challenge a visitor's perception of what counts as engine science. and thinking about the concepts in new ways. So I started firstly thinking about how I might explore the tangibility, materiality, and the physics of the 5 engine parts. Those are the cylinder, crank, flywheel, governor, and belt connection. I wanted to experiment physically and digitally with ways to allow visitors to play with the component parts, giving them a sense of agency. So sliding the crank, spinning the flywheel. The image on the left, you can see a very hands-on approach where I've tried to prototype some play elements that could be sound triggers or potentially lead to projections onto the engines. And the little screen video on the right is my experiments with the Green Sock animation platform, where I tried to see if I could recreate a playful tangibility in a very digital format, obviously in response to the COVID pandemic. I then started to think of more of a compromise for this, more of a playful touch panel that could be more practical, easy to clean, and maybe even have a contact functionality. So what you can see here is a very early screen-based prototype of some digital interpretation that I developed to fine-tune the interface. So we used a science capital approach to the UX design. So it's all about meeting people where they are, valuing what they are bringing to the exhibition. So I started to work with the team to think about everyday relevance in relation to the 5 engine parts. So each of the 5 parts has a correlating animation of something hopefully visitors will already be familiar with to build up that connection. So we're also challenging the visitors' perception of what science is with friendly graphics of familiar things. If you want to find out more about the Science Capital approach, there's lots of information on the Science Museum website. Another approach I wanted to investigate was a mixed media trail for the compound of engines. Again, partly in response to the pandemic, I wanted to explore an interpretation product that visitors could pick up, engage with, hopefully take home and extend that learning experience. So this is a view of one side of the trail, using friendly illustrations, trying to make the engines feel more accessible and a light tone of voice, and not too much text. But the main concept is to encourage families to actually move their bodies like parts of the engine. So I experimented for this with augmented reality, so to bring the human element into engine science. So for this prototype development, I used Adobe Aero, which is a free app and development tool, which is really great for testing out ideas. So the concept is that the visitor scans the QR code to start the functionality, and depending on which element they've picked, they're asked to find a particular image, which is where the trail element comes into play. So visitors hunt then around for the image, which potentially could be located next to the engine in the compound, which then becomes the anchor for the AR content. And you should be able to see now on the screen a little video of this in action. So the visitor scans the QR code, the app opens, they're asked to find the particular anchor image, and up pops the AR content. So one of the things we really liked about the AR prototype was that it opens up lots of opportunities in terms of human representation. So the different genders, ethnicities, physical abilities. There's lots of potential for layered content, scaffolding that learning, sound effects, as you hopefully can hear a little bit of. You can tap for interactivity. So there's lots more opportunities to build onto that sort of style of interpretation. On the other side of the trail, we designed a build your own governor activity. The governor is quite a strange and intriguing part of the engine. It spins around and helps to control the flow of steam. So we thought this was a really nice thing to excite and engage visitors. Again, they can scan the QR code and up will pop a video telling you a bit more about a governor and how to actually make the governor toy, as it were. So that's one I made earlier. So moving on to the user testing and data collection, the reason why we're here. Once the museum was open again to the public, the testing and consultation could begin. And to begin with, it was a very informal, conversational data collection. So just speaking to visitors in general about how they felt about the QR codes, whether they were familiar with these everyday objects that I was using, and I made iterative tweaks along the way. But during this early unstructured phase, I felt I wasn't getting enough solid data with which I could compare one prototype to another. Something myself and the team were really interested in was focusing on intergenerational conversations, and we could clearly see these were occurring during the engagement process. But questionnaires after often led to a less authentic response. Children often would go blank or shy or say what they thought they were meant to say, or parents might answer for them. And for these reasons, I moved to a very discourse-centered evaluation, which I'll show you a bit more of in the next slide. But I felt that by looking more closely at the nature of conversations that were happening in situ, I could get a more candid visitor response. So it allowed me to capture the more raw and honest feedback. It enabled me to evidence any science capital talk. I was able to listen out for visitors expressing a sense of connection, and I was able to quickly spot evidence of meaning making. So this is an example of the scoring system that I've been using to capture that moment by moment dialogue. So listening out for those key categories of discourse going on within the group, I was able to quickly and efficiently keep a tally and give each prototype a score. You can see the turquoise box are categories that score even higher, indicating the real importance and valuable meaning-making types of conversations. And this solid data is allowing me, again, to compare one prototype to another and to report my findings back to the museum. One of the biggest challenges with this data collection technique is that prototypes that I'm comparing need to be of a certain degree of maturity and developed far enough for them to be used independently by visitors. This video here, you can see the interactive panel interface that's set up in the museum and use fair conducting touchboard and projection mapping software to really give a feel of a genuine museum interpretation. So just to conclude, what's next? We're still actually collecting data and it's still ongoing, but we're hoping that this data that we do collect will inform the decisions that the content team will make for the future exhibition. And also the Science Capital focused discourse analysis will potentially help to develop more effective and insightful audience research in the future. And we're also hoping to build a new prototype for the Crossley engine, which is located outside of the museum, to try to develop more outreach opportunities for people who wouldn't necessarily even come into the museum in the first place. So really opening out those engagement opportunities even further. So thanks for listening. I'll be really interested in any feedback or thoughts you have on the work so far. And my social links are there. Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Christina. Amazing presentation and amazing work. Also, thank you all for sending your questions through. So let's get to them. So let's start from the end. Christina, how long has this? So Russ asks, how long has this process taken? It looks like quite a big project, like a lot of work has gone into it. The interactions are amazing, and also the scorecards and all that requires quite a lot of work.
I have to say the majority of the work's probably taken place in the last year, probably under COVID restrictions, there was a lot of time spent at the very early stage just thinking about the right approach. So really, in terms of actually development time, it's probably taken about a year to get those prototypes all made and that data collection well underway, because there was also lots of iterative developments through each phase. So it's not been a quick project. But
a year sounds still tight for that, for the amount of work you presented us. Great job. So let's move on to a question for Smartify. Could you give us a story of collecting and using the data for an individual museum to show it in action? For example, an art gallery you kind of mentioned in your presentation.
Yes. So these data we're not collecting for one museum specifically. We're collecting at the same time for all our partners, both the computer vision we do, and the user interactions. Now, for the computer vision work, we started with a sample of a few trusted partners who we submitted the first results to, and the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art was one of the early adopters of our approach with computer vision tagging metadata creation. Specific example, that's the thing, we do it for everyone, all the 300 partners at the same time. So
I see, yeah, it's cross institution. Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay, yeah, makes absolute sense.
Where it becomes interesting.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. I totally see that. Yeah. Yeah, a question for Ellie. How have you found your organization's response to your findings? I mean, great work, very nice point, and you're making what we present. It's not, we don't know how it's going to be interpreted. So, how has that, how has it gone?
In terms of Oxford, obviously they're kind of part of the project, so they're very receptive, and we're actually using the kind of theoretical framework and the past evaluation in our next exhibition. So we're developing it all under that framework and that guidance, and using kind of iterative evaluation to kind of test that all the way through. So that's really exciting. I have done it with other institutions, so kind of gone in calls with them, and I presented their results kind of over the last couple of weeks, and both of those institutions were really positive in terms of how they could use this data, how they what it was showing, whether some things weren't surprising to them, but it was good to have that data back up. Some things were surprising to them, and it really generated a lot of thinking and understanding about what they could do and what they were doing in the past that they might have been mistaken. So both of those institutions seem really, really keen in using it and pushing it on and using it in further development. So it has been really, really well received. Yeah, obviously I don't know the results of how they've used it, but yeah. So
yeah. So they've improved their course of action based on your
yeah, they seem, yeah, hopefully, yeah. They haven't yet, because obviously I've only just given it to them, but hopefully they will. But our plans in Oxford with the exhibition is, once we open it and it's been planned through this development, we'll conduct the evaluation again to see what that full loop is like, and see whether what we're intending is coming across and whether this actually makes a difference. But yeah,
impact, yeah. Sure, thank you. And another question for Christina. Have you thought of providing the tangible interfaces as a physical downloadable tool, something that can be built or constructed at home?
Yeah, that's a great question. Something I personally would be really interested in. It's not an approach that we've embraced for the exhibition, as it were, because the team were very much wanting to look at engagement within the gallery, look at those engagement opportunities that were happening with families there in the gallery in that moment by moment situation. But for me, I see real opportunities for that, and there was a real eagerness from visitors to want to do things like that, particularly with the spinning governor, which we developed. The feedback was great from that. And I think just giving opportunities on as many different levels as possible. And it was really hard because we're trying to compare which approach is going to work best, but there was little moments of joy and beauty in all of them. So yeah, it's definitely going to be hard to decide which avenues to take forward.
Yeah. As they say, no is as important as a yes. You know, it's equally difficult to say no.
Yeah.
Great. I think that was pretty much all of the questions. Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation, presentations. And next up, and thank you for attending. And next up is a networking session, and Sarah could tell us more about it. We have okay. Let's answer that. So, question for Smartify. Sorry, let's since we got that. Have you found you get good data from the platforms, Apple Store, Google Play Store, or have you gathered more data natively through user surveys about your data sources?
Yeah, it's a mix. So there is, of course, that data from the Apple Store and Google Play. There's the data our users agree to give us when they create an account. And of course, you can use Smartify anonymously. So you don't have to give us that information. And then Helen, if you want to say a word about the user surveys.
Yeah, exactly. And thanks for that, Gwen. Yeah, so it's so important taking both the Apple and Google Play Store information and capturing that and trying to analyze what it's all saying. So that's why when we're looking at some of the features and trying to go a little bit deeper, we need to ask those deeper questions in what those numbers are saying. And so, yes, we've reached out to a few people who have even commented on the Apple Play Store and Apple and Google Play Store. And then when we've spoken to a lot of the people, we've taken them through certain scenarios to see if it answers the questions or the hypotheses that we have, and just to get that qualitative insight versus the quantitative. And so they both go hand in hand, very, very important. So really great question, Angela. Thank you.
Good. So you've been using to pick interviewees from those platforms like App Store and Google Store.
Yep.
Great. Thank you so much. So are there any final questions, or so we think we should be moving on to our networking session? So Sarah, would you like to join us on stage and tell us more about it?
Hello, everybody again. I'll let the rest of you leave. Goodbye. Thank you for your talks. We're just going to remove you all. We'll add you because I can't type the buttons fast enough. Anyway, right, networking is going to happen if you want it to. You're not obliged. Good, I've hit all the buttons. Now I'm looking at the wrong screen. Right, hello. Good, sensible, practical. Yes, there are a few networking options. We've obviously shockingly, unexpectedly run a few minutes over. Who could have predicted? I think we're resuming at 4 p.m. I should probably check that before I tell you that. Yep, something like that. So check the schedule. We'll work it out. Working, so sorry. So there are a couple of options now. You can not talk to anybody if you need a break from your computer. Screen breaks are important. Don't forget to stay hydrated. Other than that, you can go to the queue for coffee, which is there perpetually throughout the event, and that is a text-only chat for those of you who don't want to share your beautiful faces. And you can just chat while having a break with other people who are in the event. The queue for cake should be visible on this particular break. And that gives you the option to text chat and to share your audio-visual setup so that you can talk face-to-face with people if you want. There is also networking, which, if you caught me describing earlier, I've described historically as chat roulette, where you're paired up with somebody at random who is in the networking section as well, and you will talk to them for a default of 3 minutes, but you can leave if you aren't having a particularly fruitful conversation, and you can extend it if you are. And that's most of what there is to say. David has kindly corrected me. We are back on at 4:15 p.m. For our last session, which should be exciting. That is impact and engagement. There is talk about bats that I'm particularly excited about. But yeah, other than that, I will let you get to it. Have a nice break. We will see you again shortly.